Before we begin with export, import, and foreign trade policy, your mid-semester papers are evaluated, and let's discuss the questions which are there. The first question was the effect of globalization on corporate governance, and obviously being law students, you have to begin with the impact that it has had on the laws of India. For example, MRTP becomes Competition Act, FERA becomes FEMA, and from that only you can draw the conclusion that the impact was more on managing affairs rather than controlling, as was going on earlier. And a certain amount of leeway is given so that people can manage their affairs. At the same time, certain strict norms had to come in to bring in transparency and accountability, considering that if this was not done, there was a good chance that the corporate sector would succumb rather to the conditions of corruption and wrongdoings, which was not in the larger interest of the society. The second question, of course, was a more direct question. When you talk of good faith, we must talk about the importance of decision making, which is largely in the interest of the masses and the society, and not all people in the masses and the society. And therefore we must ensure that if you have written that it is about decision making, that it is about the fact that decisions are taken with respect to the interest of the society at large, which means most, not all. If you have written that it is to the interest of all, then obviously it is not the correct answer. Moving on to export, import, and foreign trade policy, we'll try to understand the reason why any trade takes place or any person is adored and liked by others is because of the values that they create. For example, we have Jesus, who is valued because of the love and compassion that he brought about at a time when the same was missing. Plato, of course, is regarded and respected for his wisdom, the value that he has created. In ancient Greece, Moses is taken as a person who created the value of justice. Mahatma Gandhi about truth and non-violence. And the French, of course, gave the importance of agriculture and economy. UK brought about trade, international trade, industrialization. After the Green Revolution in France, you had the machine revolution in UK. And in India also we value trade and commerce, and we pray to Goddess Lakshmi, who is supposed to consider the trade and commerce prospers because of her blessings, and that's considered by most people. Of course, today we are going to look at the same aspect of value, how value is created in foreign trade, and we'll look at the benefits of foreign trade, the basis or the reasons for the foreign trade, the importance of Leontief paradox, the important determinants of export-import, the Dutch disease phenomenon and the types of trade and the concept of balance of trade, and the recent trends of trade policy in India. So we move on to why foreign trade. And of course, when we talk of foreign trade, we are talking about trade which is occurring across international borders. And obviously, this has been happening for a long, long time. We found that international trade took place even during the days of Sindbad the sailor, when, except for ships which were at the mercy of the wind and very little knowledge was there about the lands and the whereabouts and geography, we had trade taking place. In fact, that was the reason why most of the explorers who have given us our geography took out, including Columbus and others, they were basically looking for trade opportunities. Even Vasco da Gama, when he came to India, was looking for, and if you look at the Silk Route to China, all these were because they were interested in trade. And that is the school of mercantilism, which developed in the 16th century, which regarded foreign trade as a source of quickly improving one's condition into from a poorer country to a considerably prospering economy. And therefore, foreign trade was something which was lucrative, which was liked by people, and which people tried to encourage, including kings and queens who ruled those countries during those periods. And of course, there were people who were brave enough to foray into such. The foreign trade leads to specialization, no doubt, because when it comes to foreign country, destinations were looked at with a certain degree of understanding that this country is a country which will give us a certain specific thing. For example, India was looked up as a spice producing country, and spices were very rare those days. China was looked at for paper, for tea, and of course there were other reasons. Silk was another reason for Chinese, and of course not only the raw materials and the goods, but even the artisans who made countries popular through their clever art and fashion in those days. And therefore, international trade became very, very popular. A country can become economically stronger, though excess of treasure and wealth can be earned through foreign trade, because obviously any exchange which takes place is for the benefit, and when benefits accrue, they build up wealth. And therefore a country becomes wealthier through foreign trade. And of course, foreign trade also kind of takes care that if you are looking at two countries, then the benefits of one country, which could be economical due to the reasons of raw material availability, due to the availability of skilled labor, and another country, the two will become something which is beneficial for both, because they each will produce something of value which is at the minimum cost. And therefore, when such an exchange takes place, both of them stand to benefit. So we come back to the question, why foreign trade? And then we realize that the reason why foreign trade takes place is because of benefits that accrue to the nation, to the people, and of course to the countries, ultimately the country's economy. In fact, there are several theories of foreign trade, and while we'll look at each of these theories and try to understand them, we must also understand how foreign trade increases your income, and that is the equation. When we look at the equation, we find that y is equal to c plus g plus I plus x minus m where you have the wealth created through the export import, and the final increase of income by initial increase in export, this change in income by change in export, and the marginal propensity to import would be N, and the marginal propensity to save is S, and we have the equation F is equal to 1 by M plus S. Now, to understand this, we have to understand certain basis of international trade. The classical theory, Smith and Ricardo. So, of course, Ricardo made the following assumptions for explaining his theory of comparative cost advantage. So, we call this comparative cost advantage. But before this, we have to understand Adam Smith's absolute cost advantage. That was propagated before Smith and Ricardo, and that is also part of classical theory. Adam Smith stated that if two countries are to export or import, whatever country has an absolute cost advantage of one product, for example, say if India makes a product like textile, then the absolute and the cost of manufacturing that textile in India is, let us say, 30 rupees. And in the same currency, if the same textile was produced in a country, say Germany, it was 60 rupees. Then obviously there is an advantage of Germany taking textile from India. At the same time, if manufacture of beer takes place in Germany, the cost is 30 rupees, and manufacturing it in India is 60 rupees, it is advisable for India to import the same from Germany, and therefore there is an absolute cost advantage because of which this exchange takes place. Obviously, there is one big question which comes here, because we find that it is not always so, because trade does not only take place in areas where there is absolute advantage, but in other areas also. So to understand this, because sometimes for the same product we find that export import both is happening, and to understand this we were given a better theory than Adam Smith's by Smith and Ricardo, and they talked about comparative cost advantage. So here again they are talking about the same. If we take the same example of the two countries, and even if it is manufactured at a rate which may not be actually an absolute advantage, but just comparatively advantageous, then the import-export takes place. So there is constant return to scale, there is free trade, labor is homogeneous, and it's perfectly mobile within the country, but immobile internationally. Otherwise, what happens? The costs becomes equal. And of course, there is perfect competition. These are the assumptions of classical theory, and the cost of production is measured in terms of labor only. And labor is the only productive factor, which is of course not correct, but these were assumptions made by classical theory. And because of these shortcomings, because these are not true to actuals, we had this Hasker-Ohlin theory, which talks about international trade taking place because of the factors of production, which means if people have raw materials which are to be found there and not in other places, then international trade takes place to exchange this raw material either in the finished form or in the form of raw material itself. And it did not confine to one single factor of production, labor, but to all factors of production. And if the countries, they are endowed with different kinds of factors, like US has got a labor problem, but there is abundance of technology. India has got abundance of labor, but very little technology and very little capital. US has abundance of capital. So when we consider all these things, trade will take such a place or such a way that the capital gets equalized, the labor gets equalized, and of course the international trade takes place. So the relative price differences which arise out of these different factors endowed with the countries, they cause the international trade to happen. And when the rate of exchange is worked out, the relative price factors, they translate into absolute differences, and then free trade will lead to price equalization in trading countries. And of course, we move on to the Leontief paradox. And Leontief's finding was that the USA was exporting labor-intensive goods and importing capital. Now this is a paradox, because just what we talked of Haskell Rowling just now, we were saying the other way around. So why does this happen? This happens because of Leontief paradox. There are times when goods are considered superior because of the country of origin, and therefore they are imported by those countries who think that they are going to get some kind of superior goods. In that case, the factor endowment theory doesn't work out, and even countries like USA are found exporting costly products. A good example is the example of say Indian products very often find their way back into India. They are first exported and then again imported. The reason is because obviously these countries which are exporting these labor-intensive goods actually need to import certain items, and they import very often goods which they relabel it and then they export it. And of course, people who buy these imported products, they feel that they pay a heavy price for it, they feel that they've got something extraordinary, but whereas they would actually have got something which was produced in their very own country. Let us look at the determinants of import. Why import happens? The main reason for import would be obviously there is a need, but only having a need is not a demand. We know that. And there has to be backed by your ability to pay. Therefore, the level of income of a country becomes important when it comes to importing, and the higher level of income remains the high level of import. The level of supply in domestic economy will mean higher level of import. Sometimes better quality of foreign goods leads to more import, because people find that there is a superiority in the product, the usage, and it is not available elsewhere. Cheaper prices of foreign goods also lead to imports. We often import things because it would be a cheaper alternative to getting the goods locally. And high level of demand at home may necessitate import. When we talk of cheaper products, we can think of China. When we talk of higher demand, we can think of the Middle East and the crude oil. Economic growth and development also makes it necessary that we import, and the very fact that we have certain examples like export oriented capital goods import policies, which are licenses given for importing capital goods in order to complete exports. So we need to first import, then process those items and export them. So for this and for other developmental reasons, we can always go in for import. Now, what are the reasons for export? The first reason for export is to, of course, make the economy balanced. We'll see that in detail, but we must understand that when we are trying to import and we need income, the income comes from the exports. So there are, of course, several reasons why export would take place. One good reason would be the quality of the product. If we have good quality product, the globe would be clamoring for it. Another reason would be the price level. If our price levels are reasonable and sufficiently low, then also people would like to take the goods. And of course, the opportunities which are there, the competition which is there, and of course, when we talk about the other products, alternatives available in the market also become, for example, when we talk of crude oil, there is no substitute at the moment, but as soon as other substitutes come in, like electricity is coming in, electric vehicles, we will find that the import of crude will decrease. And of course, when we talk of export, depending on the nature of foreign trade, the qualitative resource, the amount of tariff and taxes imposed by both countries, they all come into play. Sometimes the product itself may be cheap, but by the time you have landed it on the port and the tariffs and all are included, it becomes costlier. And therefore, obviously, the export will not take place. There are certain administrative restrictions because of which it takes a lot of time for the product to travel from one country to the other, and perishable items especially are at the mercy of those timings. And the level of export also depends on the degree of protection imposed by the importer. Sometimes importing countries do not want those products to be imported in their country, in which case they are free to impose tariff, to impose administrative and of course quota systems are there. For example, US has a quota system beyond which India cannot export textile to the US. So all these becomes reasons or determinants of export. Now let us look at the Dutch disease phenomenon. Is export boom bad? When we talk of a natural resource and that leading to an increase in export from a country, every effort is to make the optimum gain from this sector. So maximum gain that you can accrue out of this export is what is the aim and objective of the entire economy of the country. However, this results in neglecting other manufacturing sectors. And this is bad because then the economy goes down. And when the economy goes down, later on when this export, because raw materials and other factors endowed are limited, and when they finish, then this cannot be compensated because the other manufacturing sectors have been ignored. And this is what Paul Krugman in 87 called as Dutch disease, which means that the exports of the country is going to deteriorate. Now we'll look at certain terms of trade, gross barter terms of trade, net barter terms of trade, and income terms of trade.